goes around yammering about free market had better look at the IMF, because that's what they say too. They say deregulate, privatize, bring in the free market, bust the unions, destroy the social services, destroy the social safety net, take away your pension, take away your health care, and race to the bottom all around. These are themes which I discuss, of course, in my books. Let me just recommend them again for your kind attention. Obama, the Postmodern Coup, The Making of a Manchurian Candidate. That has attracted interest here this week. People want to know what's with Zbigniew Brzezinski, what's with the Trilateral Commission. We've just had reports that if the Mousavi movement, the CIA movement, were to take over in Iran, one of the things they would do is cut off oil to China. And we know that Mousavi, Rafsanjani CIA faction in Iran is continuing their death to Russia, death to China chanting, trying to overthrow Ahmadinejad. So all of that was prefigured and basically analyzed in Obama, the Postmodern Coup. Also, Obama, the unauthorized biography, the full story on the mystery man Obama. Where was he born? What country is he a citizen of? How old is he? Remember, if you want to be president, you got to prove that you're 35. Has Obama ever proved that he's 35? Maybe he's not. Maybe he's younger. Maybe he's not eligible for the president on not one, but on two counts. So Obama, the unauthorized biography. And thirdly, the most important for the time here in Reykjavik, Surviving the Cataclysm, your guide to the worst financial crisis in human history. All of these available through www.tarpley.net, www.tarpley.net. Order those books there, and of course directly if you want from Progressive Press of California. Let's just look at the Icelandic crisis now as it emerged. It's a typical case study of a small nation under economic globalization, the casino economy, the deregulated hot money speculative monstrosity that emerged after the collapse of the Soviet Union with the help of James Baker III and then of the Clinton administration, unfortunately with Rubin, with Greenspan, and with others. Iceland is offshore. It's offshore in the same sense that the Bahamas are offshore. So there's always the danger of the money laundromat, the dubious money coming from dubious places, or indeed dubious characters, right? Russian oligarchs maybe coming into Iceland to take over some of the banks which had been public property in the public sector, then got privatized and turned into the monstrosity that we now have. Remember, there was also the yen carry trade. We talked about the yen carry trade in earlier broadcasts. The idea was that for quite a few years, you could borrow money in Japan for 0% interest, and then you could take it to various kinds of hot money paradises. That would have included emerging markets, places like Turkey, Eastern Europe, maybe Ukraine, maybe Poland, but Iceland was also on the list. That then turned into a crisis of the Icelandic crown. The crown is the monetary unit. This crown has taken a tremendous beating. Right now it's 125 crowns to a dollar approximately. That's a loss of what, about 70 or 80% since the crisis began. Anyway, it started with a crisis of the currency. And then we had something called IceSave. IceSave, I guess, was Landsbanki opening branches of its bank in the United Kingdom and in the Netherlands and offering interest rates that were higher than other competing institutions. IceSave. And that all looked fine with derivatives, of course, playing a big role in the background. As long as the leverage was positive, everything was hunky-dory. But when that leverage turned negative, as we've seen with the derivatives bubble in general, then instead of generating super profits and hyper profits at the apex of the pyramid, you began generating ruinous, catastrophic losses. That's practically what happened to Iceland. In other words, what happened to everybody else in the world, from London to Wall Street, happened to Iceland. And here, of course, so it's very clear, 300,000 people, let's say, $12 billion gross domestic product, but a banking system that was already much bigger than that. It was a banking system that was much too big for the underlying country. When the panic began to hit, and this, of course, was not just Iceland. Remember, the Royal Bank of Scotland blew in London. Northern Rock blew back in the fall of 2007. Remember, in the fall of 2007, as we reported, Gordon Brown, Alistair Darling, and Mervyn King of the Bank of England were attempting to do the traditional British beggar my neighbor strategy. They were attempting to keep the British interest rates high, to attract hot money to London, to keep London as the capital of the world globalized casino economy. And they were hoping that the dollar would crash, and indeed that the euro would crash, and that the London-based British pound could reemerge once again as the dominant financial force in the world. Well, that didn't work. And the sign that it didn't work was the bankruptcy of Northern Rock, as we reported at the time, back in October 2007. Gordon Brown created this crisis himself. He had been the Chancellor of the Exchequer, the British finance minister, for the best part of a decade. Everything that went wrong is all done by Gordon Brown personally. He's got nobody to blame but himself. And then, after Tony Blair was bounced out in 2007, Gordon Brown has been in there. By the way, Gordon Brown is desperately unpopular. He's hated here in Iceland. He's hated almost as much in Great Britain. When the panic began, Royal Bank of Scotland blew up. That was the biggest corporation in the world. Gordon Brown pioneered the strategy of bailouts. If you don't like the bailout, if you don't like the TARP, the Troubled Asset Relief Program, if you don't like that monstrosity that Bush and Paulson and Bernanke forced through the Congress, remember there were 2 votes in the House. It's a little bit like Ireland. Ireland has to vote twice until the bankers get what they want. So did the House of Representatives. They rejected.
You're listening to GCN, the Genesis Communication Radio Network.
Welcome back to World Crisis Radio, broadcasting this week from Reykjavik, Iceland, ground zero in the great financial battle of the North Atlantic. Iceland, David against the Goliath, Great Britain, and the Dutch, the Anglo-Dutch monopolistic combine, sinister, oligarchical, elitist, is the enemy. Great deal of political ferment here. We had 3 months of mass strike developments. We had assemblies at the Parliament and the banks basically every week, hundreds and thousands of people taking part, high degree of political awareness, right? It is a good example of how the Depression wakes people up politically. Anyway, the crisis of the Icelandic crown in 06 and 07 then turned into the world banking crisis of 07 to 08, Northern Rock, Royal Bank of Scotland, Lloyds Bank, all of these blowing up, and Iceland then getting sucked into the maelstrom of the British crisis because of the harebrained scheming of Gordon Brown. Now, at the height of the crisis, there was a panic run on these Icelandic banks, possibly because the British banks were all in the process of failing. So the 3 banks, Kaupthing, Glitnir, Landsbanki in particular, with the IceSave branches in the British and Dutch cities, at the height of the crisis, Gordon Brown seized IceSave, prevented them from paying. They might have been able to pay more. And he then said, I am going to say that we're going to pay £100,000 for everybody who had one of these accounts, even though the general level in the European Union is about £20,000, I believe. Gordon Brown just decided that he would be generous with those British savers at the expense of Iceland. And then he turned around and said to Iceland, guess what? You owe me £20 billion. Now, they got him down from that. The situation then was that Gordon Brown was demanding this money, and he got the European Union and then the IMF, because the Icelanders then said, oh, my God, we're in a financial crisis. We've got to stabilize. We need an IMF loan to rebuild our reserves and stabilize their currency. They've committed the potentially fatal mistake of inviting the International Monetary Fund in We know that once you get the IMF in, you never get them out. They have no success stories. They deal in that discredited free market Washington consensus: deregulation, privatization, union busting, no state sector, no health services, no education, more or less what's done to the United States by Obama in slightly different form. The question, therefore, right now is, can Iceland ever pay? There's an offer on the table by the Icelandic government, which I regard as also a mistake. The Icelandic government said, well, this is now a social democratic government, we might be able to pay you 6% of the future growth of our gross domestic product. We're willing to set that aside for debt payments between 2014, I believe, and 2024 or thereabouts. This is a mistake, as we discussed last week.